mention that's most helped, but I think that's
Really good to go. In a difficult place, that's actually, it's like done it. You know what, we're now doing 16.
make sure you're.
No, actually, he's doing really well. So,
This one's easy.
you know, you guys. So let's get started. So the basics of film equipment, you see a lot of stuff going on here. We have split reels. They split because they come apart. And this is what we use when we put film on cores. We use split reels. Different inspection benches. Sometimes you would need a split core because all you have is just two wines with spindles on it, and you got to have something. These are nice vertical wines where you don't really need one. They have flanges. They have things to deal with. Okay. And here's our cores. They come in many different sizes. So we got 2-inch and 3-inch. We've got 35 mil. We've got 16. Use those for storing film flat. You don't want to store film on a core vertically, otherwise we get some tipping issues. We have a shrinkage gauge we use to measure shrinkage. This just looks fantastic. It's not really used much anymore. It's called a gang sync for syncing prints. It also has a film counter on it. So it's really great for restoration work. If you go through, you've got 3 different prints. You start at 0, everybody locks at 0. You start at the same point, and then you have your film reels up on your spindles over here, and you just start slowly winding the film through. That releases these, and then you can see at certain points where it goes off sync. The image goes off sync from another. Okay. We've got splicers. We got 35 cement, 16 cement. They're very heavy, but they're absolutely fantastic. We use cement splicing basically for editing purposes, but if you don't have tape splicers, you can always use cement splicers. This is a little 8mm splicer for press tapes. Okay, it's just a type of splicer. Lay your film down. Press tapes are they're actually quite sweet. They're just little strips. And you know, like on a Band-Aid, you've got the seal on one side that you peel off. That's almost like a press tape. You peel it off on one side, lay it down, and then you peel off the back side, and away you go. So it's really, really nice. Tape splicers, guillotine tape. There's also something, it shouldn't be as widely talked about as it is, but it's gloves. Gloves, or not to glove. So, and then if you glove, what kind of glove? Cotton gloves? These kind of gloves? It's really personal preference, except in a few instances, in a few cases. I don't wear gloves. There are instances when I will wear gloves. But as long as your hands are clean and you're not getting grabby with the images and the content of your film, if you keep your hands just on the edge, we're okay. Now, sometimes you get a film that's moldy. You would need gloves. You're not going to want to touch that with your bare hands. And at the end of dealing with a moldy film or a funky film or something like that, you're going to throw these away. And you're not going to use your same gloves that you use when you go to work on a different reel. And at the same time, you have to make sure you clean every single surface that touched that film. So your bench top, your split reels if you're using split reels, anything, because you can transfer that mold and fungus to a non-moldy film. Okay. So in the instances where you would not wear gloves is if your film is heavily damaged. So as you're wearing your gloves, especially cotton gloves, not so much with the non-cotton gloves, is that if there's edge damage or perforation damage and you're holding it and you're winding through, the gloves can actually catch on the cut or the tear or whatever, and you can actually do more damage to the film. You could actually rip the film as you're winding it through because it'll just catch it and it'll just take it. If you're doing splicing, you're not going to want to wear gloves. because like I mentioned earlier, the fibers from the gloves stuck to the tape or into the cement, and then you just transfer that onto the film, which is what we don't want to do. Okay, so there's always a lot of debate about gloves. How to properly open a film can. I know this sounds the most basic thing in the world, but technically, and actually, it's not. You're not just going to open it and be like, yeah, film, right? Especially if you've never opened this can before. You always want to open it away from yourself because you don't know if there's gas buildup in there from the off gas, and you don't know if there's mold or fungus. And if you open it towards you, you might poof it up into your face, onto your clothes, and that's not, you don't want that. So you always, always, always open it away from you. So now you got your film can open, and you see film on cores. These are small, so these are pretty easy to pick up, right? But if you have something bigger like this, and the wind is, say, a little loose, well then, I don't want to drop it. How am I going to get it from here, or from here, onto here, right? So, first off, before you even pick up your film, you get the film core ready, you get your split reel ready, okay? So the split reels have a little notch, a little key right here. And the cores have these little notches, and they sit in those, right? So what you're going to try and do is you're going to try to fit that key into these notches, and you do that by basically picking it up this way, straight up. You're not going to pick it up at an angle, anything like this. Now, granted, sometimes you'll have a really large film reel, and you'll be like, I can't actually get my fingers around the side. Then it's okay to tip it a little bit. And if it is that big, then what you can do is you can actually line up your split reel into the center of the core, right? Because say you have one. You can actually line it up. You can feel when it pops in, and then you can pancake it, right? Let it down ever so gently, and you're not going to do it on top of another can, but in there you have it, right? You make sure you're locked in, you're okay, and then away you go, right? So that's one way you can do it. So you pick it up straight. Now, if you feel that it's a little loose, like the wind itself is a little loose, you're going to apply a little bit of inward pressure, okay? From your outside, you're just going to inward pressure a little bit, and then in you come, right on there. Okay, and we're locked, and then you just lock this down, and we're good. And we can start using it, put it on our wines, and we're good to go. Okay. And you don't want to clamp down on these because you're going to have to unscrew it when you're done using that film. So you don't want to you don't want to do that. Okay. So the other thing when you're storing split reels is they need to be stored with a core, and it's best to store them with a 3-inch core like this. It can be 16, it can be 35, but store it with a core. That way there's less chance of them becoming bent, right? So there is that. So on acetate film, it's fairly easy to see, to tell the difference between base and emulsion, right? Base is shiny, emulsion is a bit dull, a bit matte in color. The lights aren't really particularly hot in here, but you can still gauge it and tell which side is which, okay? So also, this helps with your bench inspection because you need to be able to identify base and emulsion scratches. So you need to be able to figure out what side is which, okay? Now, when you're dealing with a polyester, it's a little bit tricky because with polyester, it's shiny on both sides. There are some tricks you can use. Instead of holding it to the light, because it's shiny on both sides, what you're going to do is you're going to try and angle the light, and you're going to look at the soundtrack. In between the soundtrack and the image, there is going to be a tiny groove, and you can pick that out. Okay, it's almost going to look like a scratch, but it's just a teeny tiny groove, and if you can pick that out, fantastic. Also, because polyester is so thin and so fine, once you have found that groove, you start looking into the image frame and seeing if you can pick up the latent image on the emulsion. So emulsion, usually you've got your latent image. You can see like the outlines of people. You can see the outlines of details, like on, say, the outline of a car or something like that. You can pick that up. It is very fine, and it's kind of tricky, but with practice, you can look. You can really start to pick it up quite easily. So I think that pretty much covers everything here for the moment. So now we're going to head over to the bench. We're actually going to look and see what's in this box. In the top portion, I've got my Sharpies, water-soluble, other types of pens that I use for marking my heads and tail leaders. I've got the blunt, and then we have the fine, because Super 8 liter is really tiny, and using a blunt pen on it is just going to make a mess. So we've got long, we've got short, different colors. So it also depends on your institution. Some institutions have policies and procedures to follow for attaching head and tail leaders. Sometimes head leaders will be white with black markings. Tail leaders could be red with black markings, or it could be white head and tail leaders, and you have black markings for the head, and then you use your red Sharpie for the tail. Red usually means tail. So as a quick reference, but everybody's different. As long as you have head and tails, and the head and tail leaders are labeled according to what that film print is, and that it is the head and the tail, and yes, you're going to write head and tail. You're going to put the gauge, you're going to put the title, you're going to put the filmmaker. Some institutions put filmmaker. You're going to put what it is, so if it's a color film print, black and white film print, or if it's a type of element, original black and white neg. Boom. You're going to put the gauge, 16 millimeter, 35, but you're also going to put the length of the film. And you're not going to do it in minutes, you're going to do it in footage. So the other important part of the toolkit is a measure stick. So with measure sticks, we have a black and white side, and we have a color side, because color is thicker than black and white. We have two sides, whether you use a 2-inch core or a 3-inch core, like I showed you a little bit earlier, for both black and white and color. So when you have a core and you have your film on a split reel or in the can, this hub here fits directly into the center here. So you use it this way. You put the hub in the center, and then because I'm on a 3-inch core, I'm going to read the 3-inch side, and so wherever that film ends, your measurement is here. Now this is an approximation, naturally. It's not going to be down to the frame, right? So on the head and tail leaders, you're going to put your film length in brackets rather than a definite, because it's an average, it's an approximate. The same goes on your print condition report. So say, 550 feet in brackets. So wherever the film ends, that's your footage. Okay. Now, what I showed you earlier with the gang sync over there, you can get an absolute precise count. But again, because we're doing archival inspection here, that has a lot of teeth on it, and we don't know if our film is shrunk. So there's a chance if we wind it through to get that average footage count, we might do some damage. So it's best to have an average, right? So we use feet, so 550 feet. We're not going to say 7 minutes, 3 seconds. That's perfect terminology for video and digital, but we're dealing with film. Okay. So what else do we have in this handy dandy little box? We've got splice tape all different sizes splice tape. I've got 8, 16, 35. Also have perforation fix. So this is perforation tape for 16 millimeter. It's kind of hard to see, but there's perforations punched in it, and this only goes on the perforations. And again, just like with a tape splice where we do double the side, one side, and then we flip it over and do the other side, we do the same thing with perfix. This way we don't have to slap a big piece of tape over the image, because again, it's not archival. So we can do it very localized with doing perf tape. And you can get A-wind, B-wind perf tape, you can get it in 35, it's fine, okay? And we have a little tail because you need to be able to grab it. And it's the same technique to lay it down as we did in the hand splice. So it's like this. Okay, usually you're only going to do up to 3 perforations at one point, because after that it starts to get a little flimsy and a little flexy, and it's not as secure. So you're always going to do, say like you've got one perf that's ripped, you line it up for one perf, and then you do the perfs on the opposite sides to secure it. You just don't want to have a tiny piece of tape. You want to have a little bit of extra for security, and on both sides. Okay. So again, you saw the straight blades. Okay. Some people have X-Acto knives in their toolkit. I personally don't have X-Acto knives. I find I have a little bit more control with a straight blade that I can actually use like this, rather than with a pen type where, me personally, I'm not that steady. Okay. So we have tiny scissors, and then we have our even finer mustache beards trimming scissors, which are great, very sharp. I also have tweezers. I have 2 different types of tweezers. I take that back. I've got 4 different types of tweezers. So I have these long tweezers that I can use if need be. These are great for actually cleaning the tape splicer, because you can really get in and get some of those extra bits of tape, but can also be used on a film reel. These are just normal tweezers. I have a blunt pair of tweezers, and then I have a very sharp, fine pair of tweezers. Again, it just depends on the type of repair you're doing. With blunt tweezers, just like with blunt scissors, you're not going to do a lot of damage, but at the same time, you're not going to be able to pick up the tiny bits of tape that you might need to remove, layers and layers of tape. This might be too blunt to actually grab it, so very finely, you just pick these up and lift up the edges with these. My 4th pair of scissors, or tweezers, are fantastic because they have a magnifying glass on them, and they're super pointy and they're super sharp. So I can do really detailed work. If I need to get down and I can't see, so like Super 8 for instance, it's tiny. You know, I can't really see that, and it's cumbersome to have a loop. I'm holding a loop, but I can't get in there with a pair of tweezers if I've got the loop on top. So I might as well have a pair of these. I love these guys. The other thing I have, because shrinkage gauges are expensive and not everybody has them, you can actually measure your shrinkage manually. So how you do that is you take a fresh piece of leader. This one is marked for 16 mil. And you painstakingly plot out 100 frames. So you line this up with 100 frames, and then you have it on the base, you have it on the edge, taped to the edge of your bench here, and then you line up your film, your 16 mil film against it. You line it up per the frame lines, and then you see where it goes off, where your frame lines on your print that you have start to become out of alignment with this. And if you get to a point, you count the frames that it's off, and if you get to 5 frames, you know you're at 0.5% shrunk. And if it goes off completely, so like we've got on here, it should be frame 79, but we're actually, say on frame 75, you know it's too shrunk to be projected. because you're completely off your frame count now. You're out of whack, and you're going to damage your film. And then underneath, I have gloves, cores. I have more tape. You never know when you're going to need more tape. Splice tape. I also have 16 mil flat back tape. This is for taping the ends of your film. You're never going to use it in the body of your film unless you're marking out certain points to come back to damage. And even at that point, you only mark it on the ends. Okay. I've got Super 8 liter, regular 8 liter. And I've got another type of film splicing tape. This splicing tape is perforated. So so this is 16 non-perforated splice tape. This is perforated, so the perfs are already punched. So if you're doing hand splicing, right, this is fantastic to use because then you don't have to get out your straight blade and cut out those tiny perforations. You don't need to cut the tape out of the perforations and therefore mark up your light table. Okay, so this is great for hand splicing, any other type of repair that you need to do. This is great stuff as well. So you want to try and have a little bit of everything because you never really know what you're going to come up against when you get into a reel of film. So instead of gloves, I also have finger cots, these little guys that you can just put on the tips of your fingers when you're working. I don't use them very often, but only because they're hot, you know? So here's another. I showed you the Q-tips earlier. I have a teeny tiny 8mm splice block. There's a press tape splice block over there. This is just another type for it that you can use. This one's the Kodak brand, mine, thank you. Oops. This is the Kodak brand. This is another brand. But anyway, you can tell that they're for press tape because of this little tiny curve here that's in the splice block. For 16 and 35, you'll see that it's straight. For 8, we got a little bit of a curve. Okay. So those are great to use. And they're tiny enough, you can, they're portable. Just throw it in, that's fine. These are great for if you're doing any inspections for home movie day. If you do a home movie day event and you're one of the inspectors for the day of event, it's always great to have something like this handy with you because you don't know where you're going to be inspecting film and you don't know how many supplies are going to be needed. Okay. And the last thing I have in here is what we call text wipes. Actually, it's not the last thing I have in here, but second to the last is text wipes. And there's some here. It's a textured piece of linen that we can use on the film for localized cleaning. You can put alcohol on here and you can do a little bit of cleaning. They're textured, so it actually will pick up adhesive very nicely. You're not going to do scraping or rubbing. It's just very localized and it's really nice. And it's also nice when you open a film can and you find it might have some mold on it. So you've got the powdered edge. So because we need to kind of contain that so we don't create those spores to make them go airborne, what we're going to use is you're going to use your text wipe. This is a smaller size. Mine in the bottom are about double the size. You're going to put 35. You're going to put alcohol, the 99% alcohol. You're just going to soak it in this, not wringing soaking, but damp to the touch. And then we're just going to slightly, very gently wipe. Basically, we're going to wipe off that mold, almost just kind of wipe it off. We're not going to be aggressive about it because we don't want that coming up. So basically what this does to clean off the mold, and if you do it on one side, you gotta pick up your reel and turn it over because more than likely there'll be mold on the bottom side as well. And again, you just wipe it very gently. And then you're gonna always wear gloves when you do this. So therefore, when you get it up on your reel and you're starting to wind through it, you're going to wear your gloves, any type of glove, you're going to pick up the residual that is probably in between the wines. And you're wetting in the mold, so you're going to keep it down low, and then you're also killing it with the alcohol. Okay? So that's what these are great for. Okay? The other thing I have is a velvet. Crushed velvet, not synthetic velvet. This is for a dry clean. If a film is a little dirty, it's got a little bit of dirt on it, what you're going to do is when you have your film out, okay, so you've got your film, you want to give it a light, dry clean, is you are literally going to hold it. You're going to hold it very lightly, and you're going to use crushed velvet because crushed velvet is super soft. It's not like synthetic velvet where it can have rough edges on synthetic velvet. You're going to hold it very lightly, top and bottom, and you're just going to wind through the film, putting only enough pressure to keep the velvet in place. You're going to do this on the edges, you're going to get it on the top, put a little bit of pressure on the bottom, and you're just going to do a slow wind. Now, because we're doing a form of cleaning, you're going to have to stop every so often and see what you have. So we got a little bit of gunk there, and I only turned it, what, maybe 5 times? Because it's crushed velvet, it's super easy to clean. And I know this is going to look ridiculous, but you just basically rub it, and you just kind of, it's mostly dust. You're not picking up anything sticky. You're just going to do that. You're going to rub it, and then we're good to go. Okay. But you're going to have to stop and start a lot throughout the whole process. But at the same time, if for conservation purposes, if you're doing your print inspection, the film looks pretty good. You've noticed it's a little bit dirty. It's been stored on a reel. You know, the reel might have gone a little bit rusty. You know, it could deal with a little bit of a cleaning, but you don't want to do a wet clean on it. Just do a velvet clean for conservation purposes. You get off all of the muck that kind of comes off really easy, and you're good to go. Now with velvet, you do not put any sort of solvent on it. So no alcohol, no film cleaner, nothing like that, because you don't want the dyes to run, right? Especially on synthetic. If you're not sure if you have synthetic or crushed, silk crushed, it's pretty expensive, but it's fantastic for film, okay? So you don't want to put black dye all over your film. So this is a dry clean. Okay. And that is my Archivist toolbox. So you're going to need a pencil, because you're going to have to start taking notes on what you're seeing here. So along with your handouts that you were given a film print condition report. So many institutions, organizations have different reporting systems. So everybody's a little bit different. But the notes you take based on what you're seeing here is the same. So what we're going to do is we need to count head and tail leaders. Are they present? Yes or no? We need to count our splices. We need to look for any sort of damage, whether it's base and emulsion scratching, the detail of those scratches, the frequency. Is it just light scratching throughout the reel? Is it heavy scratching throughout the reel? We need to look at, if the film is color, how bad is the color fading? You know, we average it out at the end. Is it oxidizing if it's black and white? What type of soundtrack it has? And all of that edge information I talked about earlier. Stock type, edge code, date of that edge code. So also within their handouts, you got a edge code chart. So if you want to pull that bad boy out. So there's a lot of information on there. So Kodak has 3 different types. We've got North American Rochester codes, We've got Canada codes and we've got UK codes. We also can see the manufacturing city or country on there as well, depending on where the dot in safety is placed. There's a ton of information on there. And so all of that information that you see on your film needs to be put into your notes that you're going to be taking during your inspection and then transferred onto your print condition report. And then your print condition report then would then get transferred into a database, a cataloging database somewhere, okay? You're also going to note soundtrack types, all that good stuff. So look it over, and you're also going to do your levels of decomp. So that's why we use the AD strips in that pencil that shows the layer that we're at for acetate decomp. Nitrate has its own stages and numbers for decomp as well. All that needs to be noted. Anything happening on this reel of film needs to be noted on your print condition report. That said, you're going to fill this out after your inspection. You should have a piece of note paper and your pencil, and you're going to take notes as you go, okay? So let's say that this is just my note paper and I've got my pencil. So we're going to note if the film is tail out, which it is. You can wear gloves if you want. I choose not to. So when you handle film, you're obviously going to handle it from the edge, right? And the setup is the same whether you're using this type of setup or there's horizontal benches where you sit and the flanges are flat and you just wind through this way. You hold it and you just wind through. It's quite nice, especially if you have like a 2,000-foot reel of film. So you're just going to hold it and you're just going to wind it. Now because we have the light bench, the light table here, you're going to angle it so you can actually catch and see any of those scratches. You need to determine if your base is up or down or where your emulsion is. So when you come to the bench, you get it wind up a little bit. Okay, I may see it's black and white, I can see it's Kodak, I can see the edge code, and I know that it's sound. And just for fun, I brought a variable density track reel of film today because you don't see those a lot. So I thought it'd be interesting. So anyway, so already we have a ton of information going on that we can put on our notepad here. So I'm just going to wind through. Now as we're winding through, at the heads, you're going to note if there's head leader, you're going to note if there is lab leader, and you're going to note if there's any splicing that needs to be repaired. And you're not going to count, in your splice count, you're not going to count the head splice and the tail splice because we don't see those on screen. You only count the splices in the body of the reel that can be seen on screen. Okay? You're also going to measure your shrinkage 3 times, head, middle, and tail. And then we're going to average those out at the end, and that will be our average shrinkage for this reel. Some people do an average, some people do the range, so the low to the high. Usually shrinkage is most prominent at the head and the tail, where the middle is relatively low. It's because the heads and tails are usually, depending on what's on the outside, like is it tail on the outside? So this film is tail out right now because it is, whoopsie daisy, it is closer to more damage and it's the outside of the film. It's not protected as much as, say, the inside of the core here. So it's more susceptible to shrinkage. So shrinkage gauges are a fantastic piece of equipment. The KL gauge is the gauge. There's digital gauges out there, but this type of gauge is really fantastic. And it can do 35, and it can do 8 and 16. There's a little slider here that you can slide out. Right now it's set to 8, but we're working on 35. So I'm just going to push it over to the 35. It actually just moves these pin registers. Another thing with shrinkage is that you only measure the shrinkage within a strip that has no splices in it, because your splices are going to throw your your counts off. It's not going to give you a true reflection, right? So you need to find a long enough strip that doesn't have a splice in it, okay? So you're going to get a little bit of slack, okay? You only put the pin, so it's much easier on 8 and 16 because there's only one perforation, right? And you always register on this side on the frame line, okay? So you're not going to pick a perf that's in the middle of the frame because we're counting frames, right? So you put it on the frame line, and then you lay it across. But you lay it across on the next film line, on the next frame line, okay? So, and as you have seen, the arm registers up depending on where it is. So 0 is fantastic. No shrinkage whatsoever. It's good to project. It's projectable. We're all good. But as the arm moves up the range here, percentage, if we get to 0.5, we're still okay. 0 to 0.5, we're still okay. It's still projectable. As you get to 0.7 to 1.0, then we're getting into some questionable, tricky areas. Damage might occur. It might not occur. You don't know. Anything over 1, most likely, damage will occur if you project this. And being archivists, future archivists, our goal is to not do any undue damage, right? So at some point, if this comes at any point in this film reel, so like at the head here, we're at 0.5, great. But if we get at the midpoint and it's 1.2, this reel is no longer projectable. Okay. The other thing about the shrinkage gauge is that it also measures stretch. So luckily, we don't have to worry about that too much here in North America. But in other countries where they're hot and humid climates, because film's organic, it will expand and it will actually stretch. So that's an issue as well, because then same perforation, it slips, right, in projection, okay? So we do this 3 times, beginning, middle, end, okay? And then we average it out. And at the same time, we do that for looking for base and emulsion scratches. So at the head, you just give a quick look, you identify which side is which, and then you look for base scratches. You note if it's average, fair, if it's present, you know, is it heavy? If it's heavy, scratches almost look like, it's called a raking pattern. So when you rake like sand with a rake, it has that claw look going through. We call that raking. Okay? So once you have that figured, because we do have to wind through this thing, we just can't stop and look at it all the time. We need to plow ahead. So this is all you need to do. Light grip, lift it up to reflect it a little bit. Okay? A slow, even, consistent wind. Now at some point, you might come across a splice, and when you get to that splice point, you stop. You identify the splice. Is it dirty? Is it tape? Is it cement? What is it? On cement splices, usually what happens when you're testing out a splice, especially cement, you're going to twist the film a little bit. We're going to play with the film a little bit to see if that splice will hold. Sometimes when we're doing this kind of motion, we can see the edges of that splice lifting on the edges, okay, which is fine. Sometimes if it's lifted a bit, you'll see a lot of gunk, dirt, oil, adhesive, whatever. And you can clean those out if it's really bad. With the 99% alcohol Q-tip, just clean it out a little bit, no big deal, okay? If it's tape, what you want to look for, you're still going to do this just because it's fun to do, But you really don't need to worry about the integrity of a tape splice unless the tape is turned yellow, if the adhesive of that tape has started to ooze, and if that tape splice is thick and dirty. Splices need to be double, so when we do a tape splice, we do it on both sides just for security reasons. But you don't want to put layers and layers and layers and layers of tape on a splice. If you're an organization who has a working collection, it goes out to festivals, it goes out to theaters. Usually they platter films. They gang up all the reels into like a 6,000 foot, and then, so what they have to do is they just tape it all together, and so the tapes build up, right? But when it gets to a point in the projector where it jumps in the gate because it's not thin enough to go through without catching, okay? And sometimes also with tape is a little bit extra gets left on the edges, and we need to clean that off. We need to skim the tape off with a straight blade. Just a tiny little straight razor blade. You can buy them at Canadian Tire. You can buy them wherever, usually in the paint section for some reason. And so if there's a little bit of tape left over, you're just going to glide it across the top just to skim it off. Another reason so it doesn't catch in the gate of the projector. Because again, it's all about the viewing experience of seeing that film on screen and seeing that film being projected without a lot of distractions, right? Jumping in the gate is a distraction. Whoa, what happened there, right? So there we go, okay? You can also use scissors to do that same sort of thing. I find scissors a little bit more awkward because no matter how you want to cut it, we always want to tend to cut down. And you don't want to cut down into your film because then you just got to make a repair and you're just like, oh, come on. Right? But tiny scissors, the best scissors I have to tell you are, and I have some in my box, is men's beard and mustache trimmers. They're sharp, they're tiny, and they do the job really, really well. So just trim it off just a little bit, okay? But again, we do have a tendency to cut downward, which can be a little bit of an issue. So another instance when you would stop your inspection is if you come across any other type of damage other than splicing, right? So if I've got nicked perforations, so here's a splice right here, torn perforations, tears, you're going to want to stop because you're going to have to document that on your print condition report. Another thing you need to do is also document, especially if the tear is bad, like a complete tear or a deep tear that you need to repair. You need to note it on your print condition report, where in this reel does that damage occur. So right now we are tail out, so I would say if this splice here was a tear, I would say, and we have our measure gauge right here, so we can do approximate, I'd say approximately 5 feet from tail, we have a complete repaired tear. No frames lost if we were able to salvage it and not cut a frame out. Okay, so here we have, if you can see it, a cement splice on Dwight Eisenhower. Okay, so like I said before, we're going to test the integrity of that splice by seeing if it's still flexible, because cement over time has a tendency to become really stiff and brittle. And sometimes when we do this motion or that motion, the cement splice will pop. It will just pop into two because the cement has gotten brittle. And it's just popped. And you just go, aw. So we check the edges. The edges are not lifting. We flip it over. We check the edges. There we have a lifted edge. I don't know if you guys can see that very well, but you can kind of hear it, okay? There's just a little tiny bit of gunk in there, doesn't need to be clean. It's not distracting. Okay, now if I was wearing gloves, the cotton gloves, and I was winding through in that caught, right? It could actually pop this splice for me before I even knew what happened, which is why we always wind through nice and slow. We don't wind through like it's the Olympics, and we're trying to wind through this reel as fast as humanly possible, because you never know what you're going to come across, right? So, pull out your edge code sheet again, and sometimes these edge codes are really teeny tiny. Sometimes a circle, it looks like a circle, but it can be a really fat, chunky square, plus sign. So I have a triangle. What is one triangle? Now these come in cycles of every 20 years. So we've got 38, 58, or 78, right? Okay. So, because I don't know the date of this film, but knowing that it's Dwight D. Eisenhower, he was president in the 50s, knowing that we've got a density soundtrack, so we're in the sound era, right? I would venture to say that it's probably 1958. What do you think? Okay. Just deduction. Now the edge codes don't actually tell us when this film was exposed. They tell us when this film was created in the factory. So even though it's unknown, 1958 gives us our start point. This could be filmed in 1959. I don't know. I don't know the title of this. And it's listed as safety film, so we don't have to worry about it combusting on us or catching if it's too warm. And as you can see on the opposite edge where it's black, we've got a bit of print through. So it says safety film. It also says panchromatic. That's the type of film stock. Okay? So we can keep going through. So with the date codes, it could give us a start, and then based on the image quality, what's happening within the content, so Dwight Eisenhower, he's not a young man here, so he's probably president, we can sort of kind of narrow the date range down for this film. Okay, so we'll start at 58, and let's just take it to 1960, because after that he was no longer president, so why would he be in a newsreel? Because then it's all about Kennedy, honestly. So.
What if we could identify that as probably being 1958 because Eisenhower's in it, but what if it's a print that's made in the 80s of Eisenhower, right? Like it's a reprint. What's the next level of identification that you can go to? Because that very well could have been from 1988, it was printed in 1988, filmed in 1958. So what's the next step?
The next level of identification to kind of put it into 1958 would be the soundtrack.
Right.
Because variable density is no longer created. So they wouldn't be creating this in 1988, shall we say. So it would have a variable area optical track. And it wouldn't be a stereo track. Stereo tracks have the two squiggly lines going down. It would be a mono track because density is mono. Which would be like, why is there a mono track in 1988? Right? Okay. And that is basically all you need to do for a print inspection. That is it. You need to be able to handle the film properly without putting your thumbprints on everything. Remember in school, we were threatened, jokingly of course, with our thumbprints because, the FBI can finger you by your thumbprint, and we know whose finger that was. We can figure out who put your thumb. I was just like, that's right. Oh my goodness. Just joking, but was he? I don't know. Don't put your thumbprints on it, or your fingerprints, anything like that, because it retains oil and it'll stay. And then over time, that oil gets down into the emulsion, and then we start decomp. So here we have our tape splicer. This is called a guillotine splicer because the blades come down and cut the tape. And at the same time, don't know if you can see it, but the prongs come down to punch the perforations. Very important, because one of the things is we need to have the perforations punched for projection. If they're not punched in for projection, there's a good chance, I mean, one is going to be fine, but if we have like, you know, perf repair and it's sealed, then when it gets to that point in projection, it's going to jump. And it's going to jump probably out of the gate. And then we're going to have some chewed up film and claw marks and other sad things. Okay? So we have our blades on the side, which we make our straight cuts with. We have the straight, and then we have an angled. These days, we don't use the angles because that's for sound. Angled cuts in sound are created to lessen the pop that we hear on the soundtrack, okay? Rather than getting that noise on the sound, it lessens that. Straight cut gets a big pop. Angled, it kind of glides through with just a little kind of something that we can kind of hear. And because we're cutting on frame lines, they need to be straight. We use the angle to cut our splice. We're going to cut through Dwight's head. Okay. So it's pin registered. So we've got our pins here that we're going to put our perfs in. Now, as I said earlier, there's 4 perforations per frame. But on here, we've got 5. Oh, darn it. So, but that's okay. That's how it is. So you have to pick somewhere in the middle. You're going to see the tape in 2 frames at your splice point on 35. That's just how it is. With cement, you can get it straight on the frame line. The only thing you might see in the frames is if you're a little bit messy with the cement. Okay? So, and because with splicing on tape, you have to do it on both sides, you have to line up that splice point on both sides in the tape. Where you taped on one side has to match on the opposite side. So when you're seeing it on the screen, you're not going to see a cut and then a little bit more over here. Even though it goes by in a split of a second, you know something's wrong. Okay? And because you don't want to tape over any extra space that you don't have to. Okay? So we find the frame line. That's where we start. We don't start on the outside coming in. We put our frame line, say, in between 1 and 3, 2 and 3, right? Punch it down. Make sure you have enough leeway on both sides so it's not tight, that there's some give. And we're just going to punch it down over here as well. This gives us some stability when we pull this down and we apply the cut, right? So I didn't cut this and do the splice yet. It's kind of hard to do it upside down. So I'm just going to show you how we kind of lay it. Can you kind of see that? A little bit, maybe? Okay. Now some people, because we have to flip and do both sides, they will actually physically turn the splicer facing their way, and then we have to flip it and do the other side. They'll flip it around so it's facing away from them, and they'll pull it this way. It's really up to you, but it's easier to learn with just one way to start with. Okay? So we're going to cut Dwight, and then we'll do a splice. Okay? I'll just use these, even though I could tear it, but I'm going to cut into the frame, just cut his head off. Okay? So we've got our film in two halves. We got to make this splice. So, sorry, I have to do it this way. But when later on, you can all be around and we'll do it again. Okay? So here's our big, thick black frame line. That needs to be on this cut right here. So the pin registration is just in a little bit. So usually we're a perf off from where we need to cut. Okay? Wish I had better light. Okay, and don't be scared. He's cut. Okay, so at the end of your cut, you're going to clean the trough here. Otherwise, on your next splice, you won't be able to push it down, the blade all the way down, and it'll get cut. And then when you're done, close it. Okay? So we're going to take the other side, because the sides have to match, give you a little bit, and we're going to turn the film. And we're going to lay it down, again on the frame. I can see. There we go. Okay. And there goes the rest of his head. Right? We're going to clear that out and then close that. Okay. We're going to wind it back a little bit. So now he's cut on the frame line. We did lose a frame, but this is for education, so it's okay. All right? So we're 2 perfs in. The other thing about splicing is we're going to line these up. Okay, we're good. The other thing about splicing is you're going to want to splice base to base, so base on both sides or up, or emulsion both sides. You can't do base and emulsion on the other side. I mean, technically you can physically do it. It's not going to be correct because then you're flipping your wind. And you're going to have a twist in your reel. Okay? And you'll realize something's not quite right. It happens to the best of us. Even I do it sometimes. And I'm like, oh. So, base, or emulsion. Okay? So then you're going to take your tape, and you're actually going to line up in between your registration pins. I know you can't see it. I'm really sorry. You'll see it in a little while. You're going to lay the film down at the base that's closest to you, and you're going to take your thumb and push. So basically, you pull the tape. You have it on one hand. You always do it with your thumb holding the tape because you have more stability with it. And you are going to lay it down on the perfs closest to you. And then you're going to use your thumb and you're going to lay it down with your thumb in like a sweeping motion because you don't want to get any air pockets. You don't want any air bubbles. So if you just lay it down straight, you're going to get some air pockets or some creasing. That can be seen on screen. You're going to need to redo your splice. Okay? So when you get to this point, you've laid it down. You can actually, and this is what I use my gloves for in splicing, is like this, and then I'll just ease it out, right? I'm just making sure that it is down. And I'm just pressing it down, 100%. That's it. Now, we do that. We do it a couple of times to make sure the perfs are punched, and that it's cut, and it is. And we lift it up, and we've got one side spliced. Now this is why we need both sides spliced, because it's not secure on the other side, and we don't want that to buckle on us in projection. Okay? So we've got our perfs punched. We're always going to feel it to make sure there's no leftover residual tape on the edges. If there were, we would take our straight blade and file those down. So now we're just going to turn the film over, line it up as we did on the first side. Okay. And we're just going to do it again. Okay. We have some leftover tags on this one, but that's okay. So now we're spliced on both sides. See, it's a lot stronger. We can do that without the buckle. And so I don't know if you can see it, but we've got some leftover tags here from the perfs. So for that, you'd have your tweezers, and all we're going to do is just pull them out Simple as that. You want to remove these because as you wind through film and over time, they're just tiny bits of tape, and they can come out and they can actually attach themselves wherever they want in the rest of the reel if they become loose, and you don't want that to happen. Okay, so on this last splice, so now we've doubled the splice, right? We've got 2 pieces of tape on this bit of thickish film, and so we've got a bit of extra, so we're going to have to clear that off. Okay, so then as level as possible, so it's really fine, and it'll just kind of start to curl up a little bit. I don't know if you can see that, but you've got a little bit of extra. I know it doesn't amount to much, but in projection it actually really, really does. Okay, and so just run your hands across it. If it feels similar, if it feels the same, we're good. We're all good. I don't think there's any extra. There it is. I don't think there's any extra little bits, but we're going to clear off this bottom edge here. And there we have it. We have a tape splice. Okay. Tape splicing, if you don't have a tape splicer and you don't have a cement splicer, can be done, you can do a hand splice with tape. And you do that on your light table. You would have your 2 halves, right? If you have thick frame lines like this film, you can try and cut it, pair of scissors, or with your straight blade, as fine and as straight as possible. But you can even use this technique when you're doing repairs, hand repairs, especially if you have a tear and you don't want to lose that frame, and they go together nicely like a puzzle piece, right? So you just lay it down, okay? You take your tape, say that's our splice. We take our tape, we secure it to the table on both sides, okay? And then we use some splice tape. You're going to need 35 tape. I'm just going to show this as an example. I wouldn't use this tape. This tape is aged and it's yellowed, okay? So then, because we have it secure, you would literally, instead of splicing this way like you would with a splicer, we're going to splice this way, okay? Same principle. You lay down the side with your thumb because it's more secure. You lay it down, and then you slide your thumb across until you get to the opposite side. I'm just going to do it to show you. So 35 mil splice tape is the size of your frame. It's not the width of your film, actual film strip. It's the frame size. So we can line it up by moving it up and down, because we don't want it to be over the perforations, because then we have to cut the tape out of the perforations, which we need to do with an X-Acto knife if we don't have a splicer. We lay it down, and then we push our thumb across, okay? So we don't get any air bubbles. This is the technique that you would use if you had a tear, okay? So then you take your straight blade and you line it up onto, you move your tape all the way to the next frame line, you lay it down, and you get a clean cut, okay? You do that on one side, just like with the other one, because you have this hanging out over here. You go to your opposite frame line, and you remove it that way, okay? That's how you would do a hand splice. And just like with the other splice, you do it on both sides, okay? I'm just gonna leave that on there. And then when you're done, so you just take it just like with the cement splicers, tape splicer. You make sure it's secure. And then you lift the tape off. Inspect your handiwork, and you're good to go. And then you turn it over and you do the same thing on the opposite side. Okay? And then you continue on. And you make a note on your notes of what you've done. Even if it's a routine repair like that, you write it down. Any sort of work that you do on the film, you write it down. Okay? So now we're going to do a cement splice, which can be more fun. Because with cement splicing, we actually need to scrape off the emulsion. And we do that with our big splicer. So we have our bottle of cement, which we can still get from Kodak. So there's two halves of this, and yes, it does look like a brick, because it is. So this is a hot cement splicer. We can plug it in. It heats up the splice block here. It doesn't make it hot. It just kind of warms it up a little bit. Basically what heat does to the cement is it just makes, you're already looking at maybe, for a cold cement splice, you're looking at maybe 20 seconds, so it speeds it up to maybe 10. So it's just, so you can do a lot, right? And it's just very, it's fantastic if you're editing on film, because you've got a lot of splices to make, okay? So, this is the blade that we use to scrape the emulsion off the film. As you can see, there's no blades here, but actually your blades are the edges of here, right? So it's this motion that cuts the film perfectly, okay? It's this right here, in between these two sides, that cuts. So these are very sharp. I mean, they're not sharp to the touch like a razor blade, but to film, they're going to cut it, okay? Ta-da. So the nice thing about 35 cement splicers is you can also use them for 16. The pins here, there's only one set of pins, can change, and you can pop up your 16, okay, on both sides. Here you go. And then there's your groove here for your 16 that you can use. So you really don't need both a 16 and a 35. If your collection is only 16 and you only have this, you're still good to go. Okay? So we're going to push those back down because we're dealing with 35. So okay. So when we lay our piece of film down, it's going to overlap a bit here. Okay, a little bit's going to hang off the side, which is fine, because when we put this down, there's a tiny bit of overlap here. And it's this bit of overlap right here that the blade comes down and we're going to scrape the emulsion off of the film. We need to scrape all of the emulsion off without tearing the base. So, whether it's color or whether it's black and white film, we're going to scrape off that little bit of emulsion till we get clear. Okay? And because the cement will not adhere to emulsion. It will only adhere to the base, because what it's basically doing is it's melding the base together. And it can't do that with some emulsion, residue emulsion left in there. It'll pop. So we really got to make sure that you get all of the emulsion off, which is tricky when you're dealing with perforations, because you don't want to tear your perforations. So it takes a fine hand, but you do need to use a little bit of force with it as well. So I'm going to cut the film. Poor Dwight. He's going to go. Okay? And so because we're scraping emulsion, we need to be sure that the emulsion is up on both sides. All right? So right now I'm base up. Base up means base is up, but I need emulsion to be up. So I need to flip this. So we're going to one in each hand, and we're going to flip it the same way. That way we know when we splice this, we're not going to be twisted, because that happens. So we're going to lay down the right side first. We can keep this in this hand because we know we're good to go. Okay. And we are going to put it in the pins on this side. We're going to bring this down. We're going to lock it. And then we're going to move it out of the way. We're just going to get it out of the way for the time being. Okay. Now we're going to lay down the left side and make sure we've got a little bit overlapping. We're going to put this side down to secure our film because there's lay this down. There we go, because there's only 2 pins, so we have to lay it down. Oh, you know you want to. Okay. And it's okay if you touch the edge that's hanging off on this side because it's going away anyway, right? So bring it down, there we go. And you're going to lock it into place. That way the film doesn't move when you start scraping off the emulsion, okay? So we bring this all the way out and we are going to start in a backward scraping motion. So you're going to bring it all the way out, you're going to put the blade down, and you're going to scrape away from you. It doesn't work if you scrape towards you. You're going to tear your film. Okay. So bring it all the way out. You don't need to bring it all the way out to the perfs to start with because you don't want to catch it. You don't want to catch the blade on the perfs because then you're going to tear your film. So we're going to bring it down. And for 35, you really do need to use 2 hands. 16, it's just a real quick one-handed swipe. Put it down and start scraping. You're not going to get it on the first go. And you just continue and you kind of flick the film to get the residual emulsion off. And then you just kind of inspect as you go. Usually the edges are the hardest to get the emulsion off of, which is why a lot of times those edges pop anyway on a film print. And you can just do it locally if you only have the edge to go. You don't need to keep scraping down just to get to that little bit of an edge. You can just bring it down a little bit. But I didn't get this far edge. And there you go. We look pretty clean. So you take your cement, and it's like a nail polish bottle. You have a little brush, you've got your cement. You're only going to use what you need. The more cement does not make it better. The more cement makes it messy, gunky, and a big fat splice that will more likely pop. So less is better. Put that down. I usually keep one arm like this and I use it to rest. And we're just going to go from far towards us. Okay. One swipe should be enough unless you're worried about the edges. Tighten that up. And then there's our cut. It's that motion between the 2 blocks that cuts your film. And now we wait. Usually takes about 20 seconds. Or you can just leave it, go get a coffee, come back. It's not going to damage the film whatsoever because we're doing cold cement. Okay? If we were doing a hot cement, we'd be like, yeah, no, let's wait for just, 30 seconds. We can stand here. When it's done, release everybody, and then we're good to go. Check it, make sure it's all good, make sure we didn't leave a goopy mess in the frame that we can clean off, and then on to the next, okay? Moment of truth, let's go for it, let's see. So you release this one side first, you just bring these guys up, and then you very gingerly lift it up, and we check our splice. Hot dog. Look at that. So this is our cement splice. Very minimal. They're really thin. Back in the day, you could see big, thick splices, right? These are really thin, really nice. It's archival to a certain extent because we're not taping over the image. We're not taping over emulsion, which can age and turn colors, but I think we're okay here. It's not too bad. And we did it with this big, beautiful piece of steel. So there we have it. So any questions? Because that's basically all film inspection is. Yes?
Well, I was just wondering, is there some sort of a guideline of how many frames you can cut out from a film when splicing it because of damage or whatever
Right.
reason, without kind of having any visible effect on the content?
Basically, it's less is more. Less you have to cut out is better for the film overall, especially if it's a sound print, because you're cutting that sound out as well. And because the sound on a film print, as we have on our film strips, we have that right next to the frame, that sound is not for that frame. The sound for this frame is actually 20 frames ahead. So, which is another reason why less is more. So if we can actually do the repair without cutting out the frame, the best it is for the viewing experience and for the print itself. So if we can, even if we're going to see the repair on screen, and that's fine, I would rather see a repair than knowing I'm missing a section, right? Because we're also missing not only picture, but we're missing sound. So we can make a repair, even if it's a little bit wonky, and we might only be able to fit it perfectly into part of it, and the other part might be lost, image-wise, we can still repair it and make it to where it's projectable. So I know that's not a hard and fast, but there really is no hard and fast when dealing with film. You can do a lot of different things with it, and it's a very forgiving medium. Okay, so that's the best answer I can give you.